whenever you find yourself in a situation where you've maybe written up some copy and said, I need to push this out as part of a marketing pitch or send this out to the organization because we're doing an IT change, as soon as 3 or 4 different people all say, well, we have to approve this, it's a pretty good indicator you're in a low trust environment. Well, why do so many individuals feel they need to approve what one person is trying to get done that we've directly asked them to do that's a part of furthering the vision of the organization or whatever project is going on? Maybe the conversation wasn't about getting this particular copy or change approved. It was whether or not, individual A, who's just doing what they've been asked to do, is actually on the same page or aligned with those other 4 teams who all feel they need to play a role there. So to state it a different way, were we all operating on the same premise before the decision point came up?
You're listening to the Life and Leadership Podcast, where leaders from across the globe share openly about the trials, triumphs, and lessons learned along the leadership journey. Whether you're a seasoned, new, or aspiring leader, get ready to receive powerful insights and practical takeaways to help you grow in your leadership. And now, here is your host, Mary Eniolu.
Welcome to the Life and Leadership Podcast. My guest today is Zach Jones, currently the Security Advisory Director at CNA, a financial corporation based in Chicago, where he has been for the past 3 years, building out his team of engineers, architects, and technologists. Zach kicked off his journey studying applied physics at Indiana University and working in the field for a few years as an undergraduate researcher. He then joined cybersecurity consulting firm based in Indianapolis called the Mako Group, where his cybersecurity career began. He went on to spend about 2 years living abroad and worked from about 30 different countries across 6 continents. His experience at the Mako Group set him up for success with the right mix of skills and experience to take on the airport and operational technology cybersecurity program at United Airlines. Outside of work, Zach's passion for travel and his desire to help others enter the cybersecurity field keeps him busy. Between coordinating new hire and intern programs, guest speaking at Indiana University, and helping recruit for the Tech Women program, Zach and his wife spend at least 2 months traveling each year. Zach, it's wonderful to have you on the Life and Leadership Podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have a chat today.
I've been looking forward to our chat myself. I'm just going to ask you to start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your journey, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to chat about it. So right now I'm working at a company called CNA. It's a big insurance conglomerate. I lead the security advisory function. I've got a team of about 10 people under me. So I'm going to say kind of still in the early stages of my career, but I've gotten to try on this leadership role. I definitely have a lot of lessons learned from it. And I'm excited to chat a little bit about that. But how I've gotten to this point has been kind of an interesting journey. So cybersecurity is a unique field in that there's not really a direct, straightforward path to getting into the industry. So my background is actually in applied physics, and my first 3 years on the job were in a particle physics group. Turns out that's not the lifestyle I was interested in, but really cool opportunity at Indiana University, which was my alma mater. And that kind of kicked me off on this life of a technology journey. That was the piece of the work I connected to the most. And through that, I ended up at a cybersecurity consulting firm just doing basic audits for one-person dental practices. And as boring as that may sound, that's when it kind of came alive as, oh, this is a really big challenge. This is a big opportunity at an industry level to get into cybersecurity as it's still on the upswing. And since then, I spent a lot of time self-learning, self-training, taking every opportunity I could to grab different projects, to join different teams, associations, and then I've kind of ridden that out. So I worked at United Airlines for a little bit as well in their airport and operational technology cybersecurity team, and now I'm kind of in the security advisory program. So it's been a bit of a wild ride. I'm also working on my master's degree right now at DePaul University to be formally trained in cybersecurity finally. So
So that's a lot. And you mentioned about the self-development there. I mean, how important is continued development, do you think, to success?
It's absolutely essential. I think it's really easy when you maybe exit a certain job field, graduate college, whatever that big decision point is, when you then enter another field and you think, okay, I have all of the knowledge and equipment and skills I need to start this job. That's why I've gotten it. But then, like day two on the job, you're behind on something. So it's about fostering in building that intentional continuous learning.
Mm,
Uh, and I think everybody might do that a little bit differently. Like for me, it involved certifications in grad school. For others, it might be fostering maybe a side project, a side habit, trying to build an application in your free time. Some of I'm going to say the simplest but most pivotal self-development and training opportunities I've taken advantage of. There's a podcast I listen to that's 2 hours long and released once a week. I have listened to every single episode for like the last 8 years. And that has really helped me keep this consistent, at least 2 hours every week are devoted to
mm,
training mentality, as long as I can find time to listen to that podcast. And
yeah.
there's certainly a lot more than just that. But again, it's that consistency and repetition where you have to find what type of media, what type of format is actually entertaining or valuable to you. And
Mm.
every person in any career should have that one thing that they can say, this isn't really work, right? But it's keeping me up to speed. It's keeping me learning.
Yeah. I think in the world we live in at the moment, there's really no excuse. I heard Rachel Hollis, I don't know if you've heard of her, say once, if you're ignorant about something, that is your choice, because there is just so much information everywhere. There's the podcast, there's YouTube videos, there's just so much information. But like you say, it's finding the one that works for you and maybe fits into your schedule as well. I love
Yeah.
podcasts because I can listen on the go when I'm running, I'm in the shower. So there's just lots of ways we can keep growing and learning especially in the world we live in where things are moving so fast. Like you say, 2 days if into the job, you
Yeah.
find that you need to learn something new because things are changing and developing so rapidly. So I think that's really, really important. But coming to talk about leadership, so tell us about how you stepped into your first leadership role and how did that feel? Did you feel excited? Were you nervous? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think I want to answer this in two different ways. The first is there are many leadership roles people step into that are not like the LinkedIn ready resume building leadership role. And I think those are important to recognize and understand. So some of the first leadership roles I ever stepped into is like way back when I was a kid with the Boy Scouts and a fraternity and stuff like that. And I think it's important to recognize that the start of a leadership journey is normally before it's the job.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say my first few roles, I mean, I absolutely bombed them when I was doing it with friends and family and, nonprofit organizations as I was growing up. But once I stepped into my leadership role here at CNA, I think that's when a distinct change happened where it was all day, every day. I'm now responsible for not just coordinating a group, but building a team. So I was the first person on this team. Uh, and then I've now grown it up to 10. So I've gotten to basically handpick my dream team. And that's been a
Mm,
really cool experience. But I think some of the biggest challenges along the way are as an organization grows together. So CNA went from like 20 full-time people in security to over 120. Everybody else is growing just as quickly as I was. And I got to impart my own vision, not just on my team, but on the organization. And when I say my vision, it's my vision for what the department culture would be, what I want my team culture to feel like, the flexibilities, the freedoms, the focuses. And with that, I've gotten to flex a lot of muscles and kind of, I'm going to say, discover things that I didn't realize from all of those kind of, I'll say, low impact leadership roles that I started out in. Now that I'm in a high impact one, and concepts like trust have come up and culture have come up repeatedly. And I think those are some of the most important skills you're never taught, but they're definitely technical skills that can be trained, developed, learned, built.
mm,
And I think the book is called The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. That book is one I've discovered in just the last few years. And I think it's an incredible way to look at, especially a corporate environment, and think through how do we get better, right? Like what's going wrong at an organizational level? People will call it playing politics in an organization, but it's really more relationship building, and relationships are foundational or have their foundations in trust, in the culture of the department, how people interact with one another. So by looking at it and thinking about trust as the underpinning for how a department culture, a team, a leadership is created, I think those are some of the most important things to think about. And, trust can kind of be at a lot of different levels. First is self-trust. Like, do I trust myself to kind of put my ideas out there, to know that I think I'm right, or at least I'm ready to be wrong and fail, and I can trust that everything's going to be okay at the end of the day. And without that self-trust, you're kind of not willing to participate in the organization. And I think that's where you kind of get the root of, how do I as a leader enable my team to all have that first and second degree levels of self-trust, relational trust, organizational trust, so that they can show up, be their true authentic selves, but also fail and know that that's a good thing. It's encouraged, right? The fail fast mentality is a real driver in the world where, as you said before, everything moves so fast all the time. If you're not ready to put yourself out there, fail, get some potentially harsh feedback, but move forward knowing everyone agrees that that was a good attempt, right? It's nothing against you as an individual if you fail. It's part of the process. And that I think comes back to trust, because you can treat trust as almost like a marketplace where you can talk about a high trust organization, kind of dividends, right? Things are going to move more quickly. Decisions are going to be made more rapidly. You'll have a lot more freedom and autonomy, versus a low trust environment that kind of pays a tax every time you try and get anything done, because it means you have to maybe convince 5 different people to say, I approve, or convince a bunch of different teams to all get on board with your plan, because they don't really trust that your plan's a good idea out of the gate. And with that mentality, it's really helped me structure how to develop a team and lead the team without maybe knowing all the answers, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. That will help us bring more inspiring conversations to you and reach more people. And if you know of a leader that should be featured on the Life and Leadership podcast, please reach out to us with their details. We would love to hear from you.
And we're going to talk about a little bit more about how you cultivate that trust, how you build that culture of trust. But before we get into that, just what's your definition of leadership? So you've talked about the Boy Scout, and I absolutely agree with you. There's leadership beyond the title. You don't need to have a title to lead. But if you were to describe your idea of leadership, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I might have a little bit different take than some others. In my opinion, leadership and management, you have to think about as 2 different things. Everybody that's paid to do what I say, I'm their manager. I'm not their leader. Leadership is about everybody who's not paid or directly incentivized to follow you, like deciding to or agreeing to or deferring to you. And I think especially in corporations, it's really hard to separate the two. So I would say to my direct team, I'm not a leader. I'm never a leader. I'm their manager, right? If I inspire them, great, right? Like, that's a bonus, but it's about making sure we can forge a vision that somebody on another team is ready to get behind, that we can forge a relationship between 2 teams, that we're willing to work together without that direct kind of system of feedback, without that direct incentive structure.
I understand what you mean when you say about those who are incentivized to follow you or follow your instructions because they're directly under you. You see yourself as a manager to them, not necessarily as a leader. However, you can be a manager and a leader, can't you? At the same
I totally
time?
think you can. Yeah. I'm just trying to draw this parallel, because if you're a manager and a leader at the same time, that's a bonus, right? That's great for the team. It's great for the organization. But I think the true test of if you're successfully leading is whether maybe your boss says, hey, I want to follow the idea you just pitched, right? Somebody out of your direct sphere of influence is starting to get behind your notions and ideas. And that, I'm going to keep saying trust, because I think that's really important. Building that trust where somebody else can say, hey, I'm going to stake the future of my project, the future of my financial outcome on what Zach and his team are saying. That's when that leadership principle really starts to emerge in my mind. It's something that's a little harder to define, but it's about when somebody just steps up and says, I like what you're saying, let's do that.
It's an influence, isn't it? I think for me, that's a big word I identify with leadership, being able to influence people. And you don't need a title to influence. You don't need a position to influence. But when you influence, people follow you. They buy into what you're saying. So yeah, I quite agree with that. But let's talk about trust now. Like you said, trust is a currency of every leader. You know, people need to buy into you, and they're not going to buy into you. They don't trust you, and not just trusting the leader, but trusting each other within the team. And I love that you started to talk about self-trust as well. I never saw it like that, but that's really, really important. Being able to trust yourself to even pitch the idea and trust that if it doesn't work out, it's still okay, and create a growth environment where everyone is valuing the lessons being learned beyond just the outcomes, right? But how do you cultivate that within a corporation? I mean, your organization is a massive one. How do you cultivate that sort of culture?
Yeah, so maybe I'll use some examples on what is contrary to a high trust environment. Whenever you find yourself in a situation where you've maybe written up some copy and said, I need to push this out as part of a marketing pitch or send this out to the organization because we're doing an IT change. As soon as 3 or 4 different people all say, well, we have to approve this, it's a pretty good indicator you're in a low trust environment. So how you cultivate trust in the organization is saying, well, why do so many individuals feel they need to approve what one person is trying to get done that we've directly asked them to do, that's a part of furthering the vision of the organization or whatever project is going on? And I think by asking the question, why do so many people feel they need to double check the work of another person? That can be a really helpful exercise in saying, well, in order to cultivate trust, maybe the conversation wasn't about getting this particular copy or change approved. It was whether or not, you know, individual A, who's just doing what they've been asked to do, is actually on the same page or aligned with those other 4 teams who all feel they need to play a role there. So to state it a different way, were we all operating on the same premise before the decision point came up? I think that's one of the key ways you cultivate trust, because if I said, hey, I'm going to go stop the bad guys because that's what cybersecurity is all about, there's not a single person in the company that's going to say, no, we're pro bad guy, like let them win. But what can be a gap or a challenge along the way is saying, I want to do it in this very specific way that might disrupt a few people, or maybe I don't think it'll disrupt anybody, but without saying, I'm going to have a conversation with my leader, explain my system of thinking, my methodology on how I'm going to go through this process. And then I need my leader on the other side, because trust is a two-way street, to say, okay, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to cede my decision-making authority to you and say, what you say goes in this circumstance. That would be a high trust organization, as an example, where we can say there aren't limiting factors in the decision points. We don't need 2 hours of discussion every time we need to make a small little tweak or change. Are people really questioning the competency of the person trying to do work, or are they questioning the true objective, right? And those are both conversations that are important. And you break that down if you see those high trust or low trust scenarios coming up and say, what was the root cause, right? Was it because we're operating off different premises? Is it because we don't know the person making the change? And maybe that's where some informal team networking or cultural building or just idea exchange needs to occur before the decision point comes up.
Right. So, I mean, I talk about vision a lot. I talk about the power of vision and why organizations have to have a clear vision and be able to communicate that vision to their employees. And I think that's what I hear you saying, that if the vision is clear as to what we're trying to achieve as a team, as an organization, then it's easier to trust people in terms of how they live that out or how they flex or flesh out the way that vision is achieved. If we're all on the same page to start off with, to say this is what we want to achieve, then it's easier to allow some people some control and creativity in how they achieve that without feeling like you have to, in a sense, it's maybe not directly micromanaging, but having to supervise closely, a better way of putting it, exactly what they're doing. So the vision, having a clear vision and communicating that vision is clear. But you're also talking about having trust in the person's competence as well. So it begs the question, surely if they've been employed to do that role, then that trust should be there, shouldn't it?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say no, because if
Okay.
we are leading correctly, we are trying to push every single person out of their comfort zone to grow. So we are,
Mhm.
by definition, trying to put people in new situations and in new contexts they've never been in before. So an inherent belief that because we've hired somebody means they're competent to do whatever the task is, like, sure, we trust them to figure it out, but that doesn't necessarily mean this isn't the first time they've done a thing. And in fact, I would say in most of these decision points, the moment where trust matters the most, it's probably because we have deliberately asked someone to go outside of their comfort zone without maybe putting together the right infrastructure in place to say we also trust them with wherever it takes them.
So what would you say to someone who says, Zach, I hear exactly what you're saying, but surely there needs to be checks and balances. You can't just let people get on and do stuff.
Yeah, so I think it's Bayer right now is leading the pharmaceutical company is leading the charge in like debossing, I think is what the term is right now, removing the middle management layers in organizations with this exact mindset of if you have a small team, again, I'm a director of a team of 10, right? I'm the first line of management. Should I just get my direction from the CEO or the CIO and just run around and do whatever I'm supposed to do without really any checks and balances? I think that's a school of thought we might see more of, which is
Right.
hire the right first tier line of management to interpret the executive vision. But I think to a point you made earlier, vision's a key part of this trust relationship to say, are we actually all targeting the same, big picture of increase the quarterly profits or keep the attackers out? I think that's where there's this middle management layer, which are some of the most key arbiters of trust, where they need to translate that executive vision into something my team can actually execute on, because that's like a big picture item,
Mm.
and we need to turn it into something more actionable. So to get to your question, can we just let people run around with no checks and balances? Of course not, right? A high trust organization still has checks and balances. They still have decision points, but they're going to look a lot different, right? So if I'm trying to do something specific, and I'll use an example, I wanted to change how we define one of our account structures at CNA because I felt it didn't really represent what we needed from a security standpoint. It wasn't really true to what our objective was to stop a particular threat. Now, I pushed this out there, not being an expert in the field, and said, I think we need to change this thing. That resulted in almost 20 hours of debates and engineering discussions and whiteboarding where my leaders and my leaders' leaders all got involved in it. Now, that's an example, I would say, of an important decision being made, but in a low trust context where so many different people felt they needed to spend hours working on it that it made me feel like I wasn't trusted to make that call. Not that I
Mm.
felt that I should have made it without anybody else's influence or alignment, but what could have been a 10-minute like explain your thinking to me and we'll approve it turned into multiple days, multiple weeks, multiple hours of debating the same little decision. And again, for better or for worse, it's not like organizations are fundamentally high trust or low trust. It's super situational. It shifts a
Mm.
lot. And in that case, I was making a decision on a field I wasn't an expert in, and a lot of other people didn't trust me to make that decision. That's not a bad thing. That's just the reality of the situation. That's the context.
Mm. It's all about risk as well, isn't it? It's just assessing the risk involved, and then I suppose on that basis deciding how much you're going to get involved or how much leeway you're going to give the person to express whatever they're trying to achieve. But if I was to ask you to say maybe name a few things, maybe four things that people can do, high level stuff. If I am a leader and I really want to cultivate this culture of trust within my team, what are some things I can start to do to achieve that?
I strongly believe that the number one thing is being uh, accessible and exposed to your teams in the non high impact scenarios. So what I mean by that is if the only interaction I ever have with my boss, or if the only interaction one of my team members has with me is when something's gone wrong, And that's the only time we ever interact. We never interact when it's just a good day and we're chit-chatting in the office, and especially in this remote work environment. Those are really tough kind of informal things to make happen on a regular basis. But if my only interactions or somebody's only interactions with me are when something's gone wrong, I want to reject something, I want to say absolutely not, we're out of alignment, that really erodes trust, right? Because that means we don't have any context. We don't have any cultural background with one another. We don't understand that maybe you did this for 25 years at an old company and I didn't know that, right? So without that additional context, I say, what the hell do you think you're doing making this call? Absolutely not. Like, you need to have a conversation with me. Let's set up time. Let's set up a meeting. And what could have been maybe a 5-minute, like, quick conversation for us to say, check and balance, like, this sounds good. I trust you to be making this call because I understand your background, might turn into schedule a meeting. The first time I have is 2 weeks from now. And now something's delayed. Now the organization is paying the cost of it. They're paying the tax on that decision point, all because I didn't have that background, that context, that relationship going in. So that's maybe item number one. Item number two is being super intentional whenever we do put in a system that requires checks and balances. It's really easy for us to build an IT system that might even require 5 different people to click a little approve button. The problem is when you create a system like that, no matter how well-intentioned, that's 5 different points at which something could go wrong. Some trust relationship could break down. So I think you have to be intentional at an organizational and leadership level to say, is that actually what I want? Is there value being added? Is there true alignment or improvement or value or gaining every single time somebody is stating they're on board with an idea, and vice versa? And I think this kind of gets to maybe my third point. Without structuring it, it's really easy to stifle innovation. And I think that's maybe one of the other problems is if you only allow certain work to be done based on explicit instruction from leaders or managers, you say, you should only be doing the work I give you, or you're already behind. You can't really expand beyond that. And then somebody wants to come up with an idea, an innovative solution, bring something to the table. If the organization, if the leader has set the expectation that they only do the work they're assigned, you're stifling innovation because you're not trusting your employees, your team members to manage their time appropriately. So I think all of those kind of play a role there. It's putting trust in the individual to manage their time properly. To your point, we hired somebody we trust to show up and get the job done and be able to do basic corporate faculties like time management, right? Maybe somebody's not properly managing their schedule. That's an opportunity to fix the schedule management problem, not to say I trust you less, only do this type of work, because that's where you kind of create these negative feedback loops and you stifle innovation, you make things move slower, you really make people feel untrusted to bring new ideas to the table or to raise concerns along the way.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I really love the first one you mentioned as well about the accessibility, talking about how you get to know people. And it's not just, like you mentioned, knowing their backgrounds and what they've done that might not even be on their CV or you may have missed, but it's also knowing their values as well, knowing what's important to them. And all of that goes into play in terms of how we relate to people, isn't it? And that trust, because if I really know who you are and what makes you tick and what matters to you, it enables me to trust you to some degree. So I really, really like that.
The Life and Leadership Podcast is brought to you by Can Do Academy, where we help organizations develop high-performing teams and extraordinary leaders. To find out more about our work, visit candoacademy.net. And do join us for part 2 of this episode.
Thank you for listening to the Life and Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, hit the subscribe button. That will help us reach more people and inspire more leaders. See you on the next episode.